Hello everybody, this is Don Shum, Vice President of Audiology at Oticon. And in this edition of the podcast, I want to talk about the nature of complex listening situations, and specifically what it takes in terms of signal processing to find solutions to help patients perform better when they're trying to communicate in the sort of realistic life situations that they find themselves in. There's no doubt that when patients come in talking about the problems that they're having, the most difficult sort of situations that they describe are what we refer to as complex listening situations. In the old days, we may have called that speech and noise, but we tend to prefer the term complex listening situations because of the nature of what noise actually is. There's no great agreement about what noise is, and fundamentally, noise is whatever the patient doesn't want to be listening to at that moment in time. The basic reality is that complex listening situations are very difficult to describe generically and are certainly difficult to predict ahead of time. It is completely dependent on, at that moment in time, all the different sources of sounds in the environment, where they are located in relation to the listener, how loud they are relative to each other, and very importantly, which ones the patient wants to be paying attention to and which ones the patient wants to be ignoring. And that can change on a moment-to-moment basis. Imagine what it's like to be at a restaurant with a group of friends where there's chatter going on at one end of the table that you're not interested in, and you're trying to have a conversation with the person sitting next to you, until you realize that the conversation down at the other end of the table is something that you really are interested in and you want to change your focus of attention. Then the waiter may come and start talking to the other end of the table, and you're not interested in what he's saying, so now he's part of the noise until he starts listing out the specials and you're very interested in seeing what's on the menu for the day. In that just simple little vignette, the source of information versus the sources of competition is changing all the time. And just because you're in a restaurant, there's no easy way to predict exactly what you want to be paying attention to and what you don't want to be paying attention to, and what you want the hearing aid to try to manage and make go away, and what you want the hearing aid to preserve. So the basic reality is that complex listening situations are truly complex. And when we think about creating signal processing solutions for these situations, we have to keep in mind that the patient ultimately is the one who's going to decide what's interesting and what's not interesting. Back in the 1980s, when programmable hearing aids first came out, there was the possibility of creating listening programs for, quote, noise or, quote, restaurants. That was based on the idea that those were very simple linear devices, and the only really good strategy we had available at the time for controlling noisy backgrounds was how much low frequency roll-off you wanted. So the difference between a listening program in quiet and a listening program in noise was basically how much low frequencies you wanted in the device. Modern nonlinear signal processing now is much more sophisticated and is moved well beyond the idea of having simple noise versus quiet listening programs. More recently, there's been a trend to set up listening programs based on the actual physical location of the patient. For example, if they're in a particular restaurant, based on GPS coordinates, then a certain program is set up in the hearing aid. Well, the problem with that strategy is that the sound environment in any given restaurant is going to change on a moment-to-moment and hour-to-hour basis. It depends what time of day you're in there. It depends on who's sitting at the table next to you. It depends on whether there's a game on the TV that people are paying attention to. There's a lot of different things that can define the microcosm of the sound environment at that moment in time, and the idea of thinking that the GPS coordinates are going to tell you how the hearing aid should be responding just is not being faithful to the reality of what sound environments are like on a regular basis. At Oticon, we have a clear and firm opinion that the core signal processing in the hearing aid should be able to work across the full range of sound environments the patient finds himself in. Whether it's a quiet listening environment, whether it's a moderately busy environment like walking through the mall, or whether you're at a crowded restaurant with a bunch of friends having a great time, your hearing aid should be able to handle that broad range of environments automatically. Instead of trying to classify the sound environment ahead of time, we feel it's far more effective for the core signal processing of the hearing aid to be prepared to handle the full range of different sound environments in a fully automatic way. And that's exactly what Open Sound Navigator will do for the patient. Being able to fully automatically handle a full range of sound environments is no guarantee that the patient's going to not run into listening difficulties in some situations. That's simply not possible given the way sensorineural hearing loss affects patients. But setting up a hearing aid to act in a fully automatic way across the broad range of environments that patients find themselves in frees the patient up from having to be the one who's managing the hearing aids in those sound environments. The hearing aids should be able to do that for themselves, and we create signal processing very specifically to be able to provide the patient with a fully automatic situation no matter what the sound environment happens to be. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me. My email is d.shum@oticon.com. Thank you for your time.